explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Movie Nights with me, Matt. I'm looking forward to today's show. It's going to be something we produced, my wife and I, and Jason Dahl, our movie-making brilliant friend. We did this in 2022, and this was the first film that we did, and I'm very, very proud of it. I think it was an interesting first start. We took a pretty broad topic and decided to see how that worked as an experiment, and it did. So we kept on doing films and created a whole studio out of that. The world right now is going through some major ruptures, as everybody watching this show knows. And for anybody who's heard me speak, I would you're not surprised to know that one of the warning bells that I've been raising for a number of years is the fact that the program to get a civil war in play, to undo the victories of 1776, was not forgotten. It wasn't jettisoned in 1865 with the survival of the Union, and that many of the same formulas that have been used, that were used well over a century ago to get the U.S. to go into a left versus right polarization and an ultimate critical mass that was part of a program, that formula has been applied every single moment since 1865. One of the aspects of the formula will be revealed in some thorough detail, I think, in today's broadcast. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the implications of some of what that is. There's obviously certain victories. The idea of conspiracy theorizing is not necessarily as bad of a word as it was under the days of Biden a few years back, when that was something to cause a person to be labeled potentially a domestic terrorist. But despite that, those very, very bad ideas didn't go away either. The things that were raised by Cass Sunstein and company that really ingrained the idea of expanding the Patriot Act into the United States in order to target whole swaths of the US population as being domestic terrorists. And once that's done, the idea of being a citizen with certain unalienable rights goes out the window. And the things that we had been doing already to other people from other parts of the world by disappearing them, bringing them into Guantanamo Bay and other secret prisons maintained by the U.S. military, industrial, and intelligence complex all around the world, could then all of a sudden happen more and more to the American citizens as well, if you have the label. And don't get me wrong, there's a formula for doing this for people on the conservative side as well as on the liberal side, who tend to get radicalized by what they've been taught to consume, the type of intellectual ecosystem that they find themselves in. So don't think that it's a left versus right thing. And so the title of today's film is going to be called "The Reality Behind Conspiracy Theories and Domestic Terrorism." So that's going to be a punchy one. But before we do anything, like usual, we're going to run a couple of ads from today's sponsors. So let's start with the first, which is, here it is. I got it. It's Conscious Strength. Maha yourself with supplements that don't suck from Conscious Strength. Founded by Badlands' very own Jonathan Sather in 2019, Conscious Strength products are made in America and won't break your bank, unlike other online brands. Their lineup includes collagen for strengthening joints and hair, electrolytes that to get rid of those cramps, green powders that taste good and mix easily, Shilajit gummies, methylene blue, zeolite, and more. Flip the finger at pharma, be your own doctor to get the supplements that you can trust from Conscious Strength. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/strength to shop now. One more time, badlandsmedia.tv/strength. Links will be in the description box below. And the next friend that we have is something to do with rattlesnakes. Let's have a look. We should probably hide this thing first. Okay, so that's Jonathan Sather's brand. There's some good tasty products there. Very, very enjoyable mixes and smoothie things that I've tried. I like them all. Rattlesnake meats. Here we are. Okay, you've been sold a lie that food should be cheap. The grocery store chicken and beef are fine. Oh, that grocery store chicken and beef are perfectly fine, but they're not. At Rattlesnake, they raise protein the right way. Pasture-raised 21-day aged beef and premium pasture-raised chicken with no subsidies, no shortcuts. It's not cheap to produce. It shouldn't be cheap to eat. Bite back. Think differently about your protein. Visit rattlesnakemeats.com/Badlands, promo code Badlands, and get an order sent Monday or Tuesday. Ships to all the lower 48 states. Shipping included. So, all right, that's pretty cool. So with that, we will. Let me do one little thing here. I'm just having a little trouble with the tabs, but we will figure this out in a second. I promise you all that. I'm just downloading. All right. Okay. So, without further ado, let's watch a movie and then get your thinking caps on, because I'm going to scan through the comments section, as I've been trying to get better at doing more and more lately, and raise any questions or share any thoughts that people might have watching this film. So here we go. Oops. Nope. I'll get this. Figure this out. There we go. I think I got it. Okay. Probably here. And I apologize for that. I don't know how to get around them. Actually, I could become a paid Rumble person. I should probably just pay the money and not have to deal with ads. Nope, this is not working. All right, we're gonna do this properly here. Okay. Sorry for the many hiccup, but we will get this. We will get this. Yet. All right.
Now we will listen to Matthew Ehret's testimony.
That people who seem intelligent, you're like, how could so many of my friends, my family members, people I know who are so intelligent, I mean, in the sense that they're educated, some of them have PhDs. And why is it that they don't have an ability to think about conspiracy? Why do they just emotionally, intellectually break down?
If you are starting to feel like the forces controlling the governments of the West are out to get you, then you are either a paranoid nut job or a stubborn realist. For the former, the tinfoil hat-wearing strata of conspiracy theorists waiting in a bunker for aliens to either strike down or save society from the shape-shifting lizard people, your choices are pretty clear. For the latter, the more rational, free-thinking skeptics, a darker but more real world of shadow governments and assassinated patriots takes shape, and certain conclusions tend to arise. The first conclusion you would likely arrive at is that the United States government was just put through its first coup in over 58 years.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Yes, what happened in 1963 was a coup.
We are living in the wake, the end point of a system, a very artificial system that was only created through the murders of many leading people from 1961, 62, 63, all the way to 1968 and a little beyond, from within the United States, but also internationally. These are figures like John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr. We've had the coups during the 60s of people like Kwame Nkrumah, who had been working with John F. Kennedy to really create a situation where Africa would be able to industrialize, have full spectrum economics. He was ousted in 67.
Although it is becoming a bit dangerous to speak such words aloud in polite society, Nancy Pelosi's official biographer, Molly Ball, recently penned a scandalous article which admitted to this conspiracy, saying, "Even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream, a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies is working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information." Lest you think that this was a subversion of democracy, Ball informs us that they were not rigging the election, they were fortifying it. Many of the political figures whom you believed were serving those who elected them into office actually served the interests of a clique of technocrats and billionaires lusting over the destruction of Western civilization under something called a Great Reset. Where this was brushed off as an unfounded conspiracy theory not long ago, even Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, a neo-Nazi supporting Rhodes Scholar, decided to become a trustee of the World Economic Forum just weeks ago. In this role, Freeland joins fellow Oxford technocrat Mark Carney in their mutual endeavor to be a part of a new movement to decarbonize civilization and make feudalism cool again. Lastly, you might notice that your having arrived at these conclusions is itself increasingly becoming a form of thought crime, punishable in a variety of distasteful ways, elaborated by a series of unprecedented new emergency regulations that propose extending the definition of terrorism. Those implicated under the new definition will be those broad swaths of citizens of Western nations who don't agree with the operating beliefs of the ruling oligarchy. Already, a 60-day review of the U.S. military is underway to purge the armed forces of all such thought criminals, while McCarthyite legislation has been drafted to cleanse all government jobs of conspiracy theorists. Another startling announcement from the National Terrorism Advisory Bulletin that domestic terrorists include ideologically motivated, violent extremists with objections to the exercise of government authority and perceived grievances fueled by false narratives. While not yet fully codified into law, though it will be, if not nipped in the bud soon, you can be sure that things are certainly moving fast as, before our very eyes, the right to free speech is being torn to shreds by means of censorship across social media and the internet, canceling all opinions deemed unacceptable to the ruling class. Biden's new addition to the Department of Homeland Security is a bizarre figure named Cass Sunstein, who famously described exactly what 2022 was going to look like in his infamous 2008 report, Conspiracy Theories, co-authored with Harvard Law School's Adrian Vermeule. In this underappreciated study, the duo foresaw the greatest threat to the ruling elite took the form of conspiracy theorizing within the American population, using as examples of this delusion the idea that the government had anything to do with the murders of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., or the planning and execution of 9/11.
But yeah, Cass Sunstein, he represents economic behaviorists who really are of the view, just like Pavlov or B.F. Skinner, they've saturated their minds in this way of looking at the universe and at human beings as being just mechanistic impulse creatures. They don't believe in things as behaviors. They think that it's just behavior. That's all we are. And our behavior can be modified, can be mapped and modified by the alpha class of higher animals, which are them, the enlightened elite. And things like justice, intention, goals, ideas, the soul, these are all metaphysical principles that they say are non-scientific. We are just neurons. We're just psychochemical neural activity. driven by Darwinian impulses to survive, to spread our seed, which, gets rid of free will, because it's not your free will causing you to make decisions in life. It's your genetic drive, the wiring, the program of nature to spread the seed in a fight for survival in a universe of diminishing returns and entropy.
The fact that Vermeulen has made a legal career arguing that laws should be interpreted not by the intentions of lawgivers, but rather according to cost-benefit analysis, gives us a useful insight into the deranged mind of a technocrat and the delusional reasoning that denies the very thing which has shaped literally all of human history. In their scholarly essay, the authors wrote, "The existence of both domestic and foreign conspiracy theories, we suggest, is no trivial matter, posing real risks to the government's anti-terrorism policies, whatever the latter may be." After establishing his case for the threat of conspiracies, Sunstein says that the best response consists in cognitive infiltration of extremist groups. Not one to simply draw criticisms, the proactive Sunstein laid out 5 possible strategies which the social engineers managing the population could deploy to defuse this growing threat, saying, 1. The government might ban conspiracy theorizing. 2.
Okay, bro, disappear for a month. Starting Monday, February 2nd, we kick off the chair Tai Chi.
The government might impose some kind of tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. 3. Government might itself engage in counterspeech, marshalling arguments to discredit conspiracy theories. 4. Government might formally hire credible private parties to engage in counterspeech. 5. Government might engage in informal communication with such parties, encouraging them to help. We'll let you think about which of these prescriptions were put into action over the last 12 years. As an economic behaviorist and lawyer arguing that all human rights should be extended to animals, blurring the lines separating human dynamics from the law of the jungle, as any fascist must, Sunstein has spent decades trying to model human behavior with computer simulations in an effort to scientifically manage such behavior. As outlined in his book Nudge, co-authored with Nobel Prize-winning behaviorist Richard Thaler, Sunstein discovered that people tend to organize their behavioral patterns around certain fundamental drives, such as the pursuit of pleasure, avoidance of pain, and certain Darwinian drives for sex, popularity, desire for conformity, desire for novelty, and greed. One of the key principles of economic behaviorism, as seen in such popular manuals as Freakonomics, Nudge, Predictably Irrational, The Wisdom of Crowds, and Animal Spirits, is that humans are biologically determined due to their Darwinian impulses, but, unlike other animals, have the fatal flaw of being fundamentally irrational at their core. Since humans are fundamentally irrational, says the behaviorist, it is requisite that an enlightened elite impose order upon society, while maintaining the illusion of freedom of choice from below. This is the underlying assumption of Karl Popper's open society doctrine, which was fed to Popper's protege, George Soros, and which animates Soros's general theory of reflexivity and his Oxford-based Institute for New Economic Thinking, INET. This was at the heart of Obama's science czar, John Holdren's call for world government in his 1977 Eco-Science, co-written with his mentor Paul Ehrlich, where the young misanthrope envisioned a future utopic world governed by a scientifically managed masterclass, saying, "Perhaps those agencies combined with UNEP and the United Nations Populations Agencies might eventually be developed into a planetary regime, sort of an international super agency for population, resources, and environment. Such a comprehensive planetary regime could control the development, administration, conservation, and distribution of all natural resources, renewable or non-renewable." The caveat: if Darwinian impulse is mixed with irrational animal spirits, were truly animated, which behaviors would manipulate rewards, punishments, then a scientific priesthood would indeed be a viable and perhaps necessary way to organize the world. Fortunately, reality is a bit more elegant and dignified than behaviorists wish to admit. On a closer inspection of history, we find countless instances where people shape their individual and group behavior around sets of ideas that transcend controllable material impulses. When this happens, those individuals or groups tend to resist adapting to environments created for them. This incredible phenomenon is witnessed empirically in the form of the American Revolution, Warsaw Ghetto risings, civil rights movements, and even some bold manifestations of anti-lockdown protests that have taken place around the world. Among the most troublesome of these variables which upset computer models are conscience, truth, intentions, soul, honor, God, justice, patriotism, dignity, and freedom. Whenever individuals shape their identities around these very real, though immaterial, aka metaphysical, principles, they cannot be nudged towards predetermined decisions that defy reason and morality. Adherence to these principles also tends to afford thinking people an important additional edge of creative insight necessary to cut through sophistry, the false explanatory narratives that attempt to hide lies behind the appearance of truth. It witnessed on multiple occasions throughout history, individuals who view the health of their soul with the will often decide to sacrifice personal comfort and even their lives in order to defend those values which their minds and consciences deem important. These rare but invaluable outliers will often resist policies that threaten to undo their freedoms or undermine the basis of their society's capacity to produce food and energy for their children and grandchildren. What is worse is that their example is often extremely contagious, causing other members of the sheep class to believe that they too are human and endowed with unalienable rights, which should be defended. Whenever this type of thinking is done, carefully crafted narratives fed to the masses by an enlightened elite will often fail in their powers to persuade, since seekers after truth soon come to realize that ideas and intentions, aka conspiracies, shape our past, present, and future. When the dominating intention shaping society's trajectory is in conformity with natural law, humanity tends to improve, freedoms increase, culture matures, and evil loses its hold. Inversely, when the intentions animating history are out of conformity with natural law, the opposite happens, as societies lose their moral and material fitness to survive and slip ever more quickly into dark ages. While sitting in a jail in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. described this reality eloquently when he said, "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. One is not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." From Plato's organization of his academy and efforts to shape a philosopher king to beat the forces of the Persian Empire, to Cicero's efforts to save the Roman Republic, to Augustine's battles to save the soul of Christianity, all the way to our present age, conspiracies for the good and counter-conspiracies for evil have shaped history. If one were to begin an investigation into history without an understanding that ideas and intentions cause the trajectory of history, then one would become incapable of understanding anything essential about one's own reality. Unfortunately, among history professors dominant in today's world, this is becoming the standard practice, to discount conspiracy. The truth of this claim will be apparent to any serious truth seeker to discover for themselves. It is irrelevant that behaviorists and other fascists wish their victims to believe that history just happens simply because random, short-sighted impulses kinetically drive events on a timeline. If you question World Health Organization narratives on COVID-19, or doubt the use of vaccines produced by organizations like AstraZeneca due to their ties to eugenics organizations, then you are a delusional conspiracy theorist.
Many of the organizations working with Oxford's AstraZeneca are things like the Galton Institute, which was just the British Eugenics Society renamed in 1989, or the Human Society for the Human Sterilization Society for Human Betterment, which was renamed the Engender Health in the 80s.
Rediscover trust with Rumble Cloud. No vendor lock-in, no hidden fees.
Or no, that was renamed earlier. That was a really bad
If you
name.
doubt that global warming is caused by carbon dioxide, or that implementing the Paris Climate Accords may cause more damage to humanity than climate change ever could, then you must be a conspiracy theorist. If you believe that the US government just went through a regime change coordinated by something called the deep state, then you run the risk of being labeled a delusional threat to the general welfare, deserving of the sort of treatment doled out to any typical terrorist. It appears that the many comforts we have taken for granted over the past 50-year drunken stupor called globalization are quickly coming to an end, and thankfully not one, but two opposing intentions for what the new operating system will be are actively vying for control. This clash was witnessed in stark terms during the January 20 Davos summit, where Xi Jinping and Putin's call for a new system of win-win cooperation, multipolarity, and long-term development offset the unipolar, zero-sum ideologues of the West seeking to undo the foundations of industrial civilization. Any way you look at it, conspiracies for good and for evil do exist now, as they have from time immemorial. The only question is, which conspiracy do you want to be a part of?
If humanity is organized by ideas and intentions that are either in accord with natural law or in perversions of natural law, which ideas do we want to allow govern our existence and our identities as we develop over the ensuing months and years ahead, right? Because you can only participate in either conspiracy if you have understanding of the variables at play, and that takes effort, mind work. People can't be just voyeurs in this process, but you have to have real knowledge, or else you're going to be a good person maybe, but as soon as you go in with ignorance in the process you're trying to intervene on, you will fall for all sorts of traps. You will make bad judgments. You're going to get yourself hurt, others hurt. It happens left and right, and that's a big part of these operations. Most people who are acting as operatives for the enemy don't even realize it. They're often good people. They haven't taken the time to discipline their minds to think about what they know and what they don't know, what they think is true, but they haven't proven to be true. So they have to make the act of cognition more rigorous and really love the truth a lot more and spend a lot more time reading and researching and then act. So like Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China, made the point, learning is hard, action is easy. But then your power of insight, your wisdom is going to be enhanced so much more when you take that time and then go into policy discussions, run for office on a municipal, federal level. Like everybody should be thinking seriously about becoming leaders right now.
Okay, my mic was totally muted there, so I was speaking and no one could hear me. I'm assuming that I could be heard right now. Can I get a little verification from anybody right now in the chat? Tell me if they can hear me speak. And if you can, write it down, and that way I can read it and we'll know that I can be heard. All right, I'm assuming that I can be heard. All right, 5 times 5 says Raw Shark lives. Okay, good. And that's doubled up by MZ Mouser. Excellent. So I hope that people generally enjoyed that that presentation. That again was a bit of a surprise, as I think some people here have already met Jason Dahl, who was the voice of the narrator behind the script. Originally, I had met him I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. You know, I met him originally as he was a podcaster running a program called Super Spreaders, and he asked to interview me. And I said, sure, as I almost always do to people who don't look like they're satanic agents. And he sent me a little promo clip about a week before the interview was scheduled to live stream, which was a 10-minute fantastic production, nearly, I mean, we're talking a professional video of 10 minutes just to promote an interview that wouldn't be watched by that many people. And then he did another one, and I realized that this guy can produce. He's got insights. And after the interview, I asked him, hey, could you take one of our articles and see if you can make it a film, which he did. That's what we just watched. And I think that this idea right now is extremely important. Conspiracy theorizing, I mean, you know, all of human society has been animated by ideas. And that's such an important thing to think about is, you know, like we're in a very materialistic world that is deconditioned, which should be self-evident, that we should understand more readily that the reason why things happen is because we have thoughts about reality. We have free will, a desire to make things better as our species character. And when those two things act together, we think and imagine the future, both for good and bad trajectories. And we problem solve based upon objective diagnostics that we create over what's causing problems, what's causing the lack of potential, what's causing potential scarcity to artificially emerge, choking off the well-being of ourselves, of our family, of our children in the future. And then we problem solve with a better ideal in our imaginations, in our minds of what's possible, what has precedence, and we act accordingly. And those future states we imagine as ideas, as concepts, will organize how we plan, how we unfold every single moment in time, right? Now that's a common sense thing, one would think. But as soon as you get into academia, of course, that becomes something you're not allowed to apply to any analysis of understanding of anything that has ever happened. Instead, what you have is something called radical positivism. It's a fake language, a fake scientific language that was cooked up in the 19th century. It has precedents before that, but it's pretty much based on the idea that only empirical data that is measurable should be treated as real. If you can measure it, if you can weigh it, if you can smell it, give a scalar metric for it, for the lightness, the brightness, the color, swatch, the heaviness, the roughness, it has to be something that can be quantifiable according to gradients of the 5 primary senses. And if that's done, you could put it on a chart. You could describe it with pie charts, with little graphs, whatever. And that's real. But what about the things like justice, right? What about the things that transcend the pie chart, that transcend the sense, that transcend the senses? What about gravity, right? We could measure the effects of gravity. We know we've been able to discover that there's certain formulas that are useful to measure the influence of gravity when you have objects separated by distance moving in time and space. So you have things like the inverse square law, which showcases a reduction of gravity from the source of that gravitational field in time. And then you can use basic calculations without being perfectly mathematically true. You can always use it in a very useful way, and you can even forecast where planetary orbits are going to be, where parabolic trajectories are going to be, where comets are going to return back into our certain part of the orbit. We can do a lot. But you can't, it's not actually gravity per se that's being measured, it's the effects of it that have certain constants that have been discovered in time. But gravity itself is something, it's something else. It's actually something that's much more in harmony with, when you look at the writings of the person who made the discovery of gravity, that being especially the figure of Johannes Kepler, who lived well over 400 years ago. It was a musical idea. He was looking at proving the harmonics of the solar system, to prove why are things the way they are rather than some other arrangement. Why are the planets the way we find them rather than some other imaginable set of arrangements? And his hypothesis was governed by what he had read, as he describes it, in the Timaeus dialogue, going back 2,000 years even before him, written by Plato, documenting a metaphysical exposition of the universe, of the creator, written in the 4th century BC, and I think it's like 370 or sort of 360 BC it was written. So, but you know, he's using an outline put forth by Plato in the Timaeus, which documented for the first time a Pythagorean theory of the purpose of the planetary motions that are tied to both a geometric construction as well as a harmonic construction of frequencies that are not random, that are tied specifically to reasonable geometric places on a chord where you could find a square, a triangle, a pentagon, a hexagon that would generate certain quantized numbers, certain frequencies, certain relationships that when plucked and played together would cause the soul to be elevated with beauty, or in the case of things like the Devil's Interval, where you have certain disharmonious frequencies like F sharp to C, those actually end each other's resonance. So you have certain things like that, which Kepler also treated in his formation of a hypothesis of the solar system's purpose and causes, when he found and predicted 200 years before it was to be discovered the orbital belt series and the asteroid belt, the asteroid belt series, which is contained in an orbit between Mars and Saturn. Now, he didn't know about it. He never saw it, but he knew it. He could see it with his mind's eye, with reason. He saw that there must be something there. Now, how powerful of an idea is that? He used his senses, but his discovery was not hinged upon his senses. He used his senses in order to find the ironies, the cracks, and to pose questions pertaining to an assumption of intention governing reality, that there is a reason, right? This was his question. What is the purpose of God to have created the universe as we find it, as we were created into it, rather than some other possible configuration? What is in the mind of God? What is it in purpose? What is purposeful in creation, which doesn't dismiss beauty? That beauty itself has purpose, which itself also is part of the psyop that's been played on us for many, many generations, right? That we must presume that questions of beauty, of ugliness, of aesthetics are something completely separate from topics pertaining to science, logic, and what have you. I'm seeing somebody say they can't see me. Well, I can't do much about that because currently, unfortunately, oh, I know what's going on. I know what's going on. There we are. There we are. Now, my whole screen just shut down, and I couldn't actually play around with my screen. And it's only now that I noticed somebody who said we can't see you. So I did fix that. Sorry about that. Yes. So yeah, back to the question of like separating, schisming out the sciences from the arts. That's also been something done to scramble our ability to think about conspiracy in a rational, natural law, from the standpoint of true natural law, right? And that's something that's why I found it very important to go and restudy the sermons and the writings of people like Martin Luther King Jr., who, just like the American founding fathers, was very, very consistent and very, very adamant to teach and to incorporate into his organizing as a leader of other people to rise to themselves, become leaders, that there is such a thing as natural law, and that you can judge human laws when the discoverable natural laws of God's creation are not in harmony with those laws created by humans. When something is human created and it is in harmony with said higher law, it's good and should be followed. It should be abided by. If it isn't, and if a justice is being broken according to the demand of obedience to said law, then it's actually an unlawful law, and it is in fact more a form of violence than it is law, and should thus be resisted, as the American founding fathers knew. It wasn't just taxation without representation. It was much more, but also the Jim Crow laws, right, that Martin Luther King and people living in the 1950s and 60s were dealing with, which was that if you go to certain states, there are certain laws that you are expected to abide by, which demand that you not go to certain bathrooms if you have a certain complexion of skin, or use certain facilities like water fountains or chairs in public spaces if you have a certain color of skin, or be permitted to run for office. So these are all important questions which people philosophically should easily have in the back of their mind when they're trying to figure out how do we navigate through things, because those are ugly laws. Those are ugly ideas that shape those laws, right? Hence this question of aesthetics. If you look at a lie, at something which is untruthful, but being imposed as a truth, as a law, as a rule to be followed by humans, well, all of a sudden that's, if it's going to destroy your well-being, if it's going to destroy your freedom, if it's going to destroy that potential for goodness, it's ugly. It's really ugly, even if it might use flowery language, right? That's the definition of sophistry. Similarly, sometimes people might use a language which is rough around the edges, not aesthetically pleasing, but yet still beautiful, in the sense that the intention organizing the words, the fight for a certain policy, might sometimes sound rough, but it actually, if you think about the intention, find that it is beautiful. It's a beautiful idea, or sometimes it's even better when people with good ideas and beautiful ideas actually speak well as at the same time. That's the best, which is why people are often moved so much when they listen to John F. Kennedy's or Robert F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. speeches. And you find that there is this poetry, this beautiful poetry, but that also accompanies reason, rigor, logic, morality, tied to concepts for the future that are necessary and good. Multi-Hackle just wrote, "What are your opinions on Jeffrey?" I don't know what that means. That seems like an unthought through question. So try to maybe make that a little more coherent. I can just lost my internet there momentarily. So yeah, if you could try to write that out in such a way that I can make sense of it, I can address it. So yeah, no, that's where I think that if we look at today, there is such an important set of potentials for something really bright and beautiful and good for the future, for this golden age that we all hope can be part of our children's destiny, maybe even part of our world that we live in, that we're alive to see. But there are certain toxic, sick ideas too that are very, very ugly. And as I mentioned, everybody, to the degree that you choose to, you can be a part of these conspiracies. You can be part of, to varying amplitudes, a motion towards fighting for goodness and truth and beauty, or the opposite. And even by being ignorant, thinking that you're not taking part in an evil thing, sometimes just the act of not helping the good, not resisting evil, is itself helping evil. And so, as I mentioned, many people find themselves serving an interest that is their own, becoming their own enemy without even realizing it, to varying degrees, if they haven't taken the time to read, to think through these matters. And I brought up Kepler, but you could bring up any number of great minds who've honed and matured their minds to fall into harmony with the mind of the creator. And thus you can weigh the quality of their metaphysical ideas based upon the truthfulness of those eurekas, of those discoveries, and their applicability in enhancing humanity's power to sustain more of our species at a greater quality of life, with greater powers over the invisible forces of nature that can become increasingly our servants. Instead of using physical human servants or even animal servants, over time, as we discover more and more about those invisible laws, we gain, if we choose to act accordingly, a new power over, for example, aerodynamics. When we're ignorant of the laws of aerodynamics, our power to have it serve us, to fly, is not there. We don't have that power. We're subservient to it as our master, right? When we can control it, when we can understand it, we can start influencing it in such a manner that our power to move quicker, faster, easier is increased. Our freedom of motion, our freedom of communication with other people is increased as we learn to fly, and it no longer takes 4 months or whatever it took 100 years ago to sail across the oceans. It can take all of a sudden just a few hours with hypersonic planes, which we should really have. We had them in the 70s, we had them in the 80s, but we don't have them anymore. But if we developed, once again, hypersonic planes, passenger planes, then traveling from New York to Paris would easily happen within 2 hours or less. It's something that's available even with current technologies, let alone the new technologies that we have not yet developed. So again, all of this is contingent. These physical material powers and freedoms of motion are contingent on our ability to discover the laws of God, right? And that's where it's important to refuse the idea of science, the arts, but also of theology, because the implications of there being a truth, of there being purposefulness and beauty that's tied to truth, embedded in nature even before there were humans, implies there's certain religious and spiritual implications for what that means, which is a beautiful thing. It's a great idea. And it shows you as well that a lot of these behaviorists and materialists that have risen to power throughout the technocracy, including, I mentioned Cass Sunstein and a variety of others, they themselves are followers of the structures of people like Richard Dawkins, who himself calls himself Darwin's second bulldog after the first bulldog of T.H. Huxley. Darwin himself being somebody who said that there's no such thing as soul, that in the new science emerging under the Royal Society of the 19th century, that the pure materialistic impulses, the desire to survive, to thrive, to have sex, would prove that the earlier concepts of humanity that were believed by such people as the founding fathers and authors of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and everything that had ever come before in human history for thousands of years, all of that was irrelevant. We should stop paying attention, because now we know that that the theory put forth by Darwin is the new gospel. It became a new religion that professed to be anti-religious, but because it couldn't actually prove scientifically what it was saying to be true, it demanded faith based on unquestionable axioms that you had to accept as dogma and doctrine. Amongst which we could find as examples of this new gospel, this new secular gospel, such things as the belief in random mutations, that there was no flow and orientation that would be directed or tempered by moral or design concepts, that everything would be random at the very small, and that those random changes would generate qualitative transformations in the biological organism that was constantly undergoing these minute microscopic mutations. That was one of the doctrines. Was it provable? No. So it was a religion in that sense. It was a blind, but a worse kind of religion, because it was based upon the worship of irrationality, the rolling of the dice, the casino god, the god that does play dice, which is what Einstein, people might have a problem with Einstein, but what he was saying in his dispute with Niels Bohr was absolutely true. Absolutely true. That God does not play dice. To assume that God does play dice and has a gambling problem and chose to wire the unfolding of all of creation according to gambling principles, that says more about the psychological profile of the person who spits that out and wants to believe that than it does about God. That's actually an embarrassing thing that people like Niels Bohr and others were pushing, because it says more about the kind of universe they want to live in that would justify their own lazy, slavish type of libertine behavior that would not have any implications to the health of their non-existent soul. Because if there is no soul and there is no purpose, then there's no repercussions to doing what thou willst, which would be the whole of the law. And that would be ultimately the driving motive for a lot of these apparent complex configurations of whether it's Darwinism, whether it's the Copenhagen school of quantum mechanics promoted by people like Bohr. There's always something ugly in the intention to create a apparent scientific veneer, or positivism, right? The radical positivism of an Ernst Mach and the broader school of the Vienna school that also had applied this positivist tradition into the realm of economics, creating such things as modern economic liberalism. This belief that there is no point there, we should not allow intentions to govern economic behavior. That was the school of economic liberalism that that created the foundation of today's modern globalization machine of degeneracy and decay and destruction. It's all rooted in the application of these positivist theories into the realm of human behavior, because if humans are just like another form of particle with no purpose, then we know that we do have desires, things coming in, right? We want to eat, we want to consume, people like sex, they got things coming out, we breathe in, breathe out, we poop, we do other things, and people are just seen as these little particles of inputs, outputs that push and pull on each other, that are animated by certain impulses for self-aggrandizement at the expense of others, that it's a Hobbesian each versus all universe of survival of the fittest, another principle of Darwin that you have to believe is true without being able to prove it's true, because in fact in nature we find that nature has complementarity, that it has harmoniousness. Cooperation is actually much more grounded within the evidence of nature than we find anything opposed to that, where a stronger being just naturally wants to destroy, eat, and kill at the expense of everything around that species or that individual within that species group. We don't find that that's actually primary. So all that to say, this was done when people started saying, oh, well, we can presume that the markets will always define, because the markets are the expression of our hedonistic desires and our desire to avoid pain, maximize pleasure, and we can calculate, right? Says Jeremy Bentham of the British East India Company and British Foreign Office. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of the hedonistic calculus that formed the basis of, again, modern economic liberalism. He was told, like, he put forth this idea that we can calculate and create a scalar metric for the degrees of intensity of pleasure and pain that we could then use to map onto the behavior of markets, that we use then to generate our theories of pricing, of economic theories, of interest. What do we use to set our interest rates and other things, but especially pricing and rents. And then we can presume that the market, that creativity naturally happens when you let individuals pursue what they whilst. When you let everybody just free to do what they want to maximize their hedonistic lusts, their desires for power, their ego, all of that stuff, then naturally attention builds up, around which competition emerges, out of which innovation occurs, and growth and goodness and happiness in hidden invisible hands just make it all work out. No protectionism, no national planning, no national bank is needed. And in fact, under that absurd thesis, if you do those things and use the power of the sovereign nation state to play any role in defining the trajectory of a society, which makes up that government, that society, that nation is made up of individuals who take responsibility in a healthy world for the outcomes of that society that they're born into. Anybody who tries to do that, says the economic positivists and liberals, is actually infringing against the laws of nature and should be stopped. You should be stopped if you try to do protectionism, or you try to use a national bank, or you try to direct a project like the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Which is a multi-generational, massive idea as a concept that organizes the priorities, the flow, the labor, what types of new industries are going to be created, what types of new cities are going to be created, what types of engineering problems have to be solved. All of that has to be done. What type of training programs are you going to have for your education? What type of reforms for education are you going to have to produce the type of experts who will be able to go and carry out the jobs of doing things that are today impossible, but have to have a powerful minds in young people who then also see themselves as playing an important part of their society as a whole. All of these things have to be brought into consideration for a healthy society to exist and progress according to natural law, to override the tendency towards entropy that we will always encounter when we're not creative, when we stagnate. when we get too comfortable in our status as slothful animals moving from moment to moment with no plan, well, we become things like what we've lived in, a consumer society, a society of decadence that increasingly uses up resources without creating more resources than they're using. And as that happens, more input, less output, decrease of potential, increase of scarcity, increase of entropy is the outcome. And all of the warnings of the Malthusians, the technocrats who are Malthusians, who deny the power of creative reason, of God, of soul, that all of a sudden begins to manifest as if it were true, right? Unless you can override that by making more progressive discoveries. So I'm just going to quickly look here. Team Smooth says, random evolution is quite diverse, symbiotic, creative, colorful, couldn't possibly have a righteous director, tongue-in-cheek. Yes, I appreciate the sarcasm. And I mean, that there's actually a really good film made by, maybe I'll even play it if I'm allowed. I don't know if I can get sued for it though. Probably not a good idea. I could probably get sued for it. But it's called No Intelligence Allowed by Ben Stein, an actor who was famous. Sadly, I think he became most famous for anything else he'd ever done because of him saying Bueller on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He was the teacher, the high school teacher. But he was a decent actor, and he was also a speechwriter for Richard Nixon. And he did a movie in 2008 or 9 called No Intelligence Allowed, Expelled, featuring the systematic abuses of professors in academia who questioned the Darwin gospel. And it's a fantastic 1.5 hour documentary, just doing a great job at exposing the absurdities underlying the Darwinian theory of evolution. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as evolution. I'm not saying that because I deny Darwin's theory, I'm saying that no evolution exists. I'm not saying that as some people have accused me. What I'm saying is the Darwinian model is provably a hoax, justified, promoted only to justify a certain kind of imperial expansion and organizing of society in a fascist modality. And that can be proven by going to look at the handlers of Darwin from Huxley's X Club and the Royal Society and other agencies, as well as the printing presses and the Rockefeller takeover of school systems, what was behind Huxley's grandson, Julian Huxley, who created the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization in 1946, that infused, that worked to amplify the belief that Darwin's theory was more than a theory and became actually a gospel law. What was behind all of that? It was an imperial power structure of an ancient system of belief that human beings were animals to be managed by a higher set of zookeepers. There are healthier ideas of evolution that embrace, as Ben Stein goes through some examples in his documentary, a notion of intelligence, of design, of purposefulness, of flow that is directed, which Darwin again denies. And real Darwinists will take offense emotionally at the idea, the suggestion that there could be a directionality in the flow of living matter. They will take offense because Darwin denies directionality. It's all just random, not better or worse. It just is moving in that direction. And part of, I think, the reason why is that they're also just going on a flow state right now, right? But one of the things that they're doing is that it's I think recognized that the existence of an organized, directed, creative evolution of lower orders of potential of amoebas, very simple states of living organization that we had found hundreds of millennia ago, like even I think the earliest fossils that we have are something like 550 million years ago or so. The dating aspects might be flimsy, but that's the current sort of mainstream assumption, at least. But we know that as you go further down into the records, into the rocks, that we find that there's different arrangements of non-existent organisms that used to exist that no longer exist, that they tend to not be gradual, that they're changes that we find within the structures of these various non-existent, extinct living beings, from plant life to insects to larger organisms, that they tend to emerge in more discontinuous ways. They're not slightly, slowly changing gradualistically, as Darwin also presumes, that everything is just gradual, slow change. But no, there's punctuated discontinuities. And it seems like whole systems change together, that there are, and this is where the theory that I think is pretty well grounded, that there are these extinction cycles, these cataclysmic events that also accompany mass creation moments, where whole higher sets of organizing systems emerge out of or after extinction cycles, of which there have been approximately 5 major ones in the past 500 million years. But we know when you go back to the simplest examples of organisms, what we tend to find are in the Precambrian, Cambrian period, singular-celled, simple amoebas within ocean beds, deep down. And something is happening whereby these simple, boring things that don't change very much, that don't have too much dynamism, are emerging new technologies, biotechnologies in a sense, by generating, innovating qualities like photosynthesis. Right? All of a sudden, a power emerges within life that allows for this excess energy from the sun and from stars to be used to generate, to drive the organic behavior of the very complex cells and cellular existences within these organisms. My God, mind-blowing. All of a sudden, with that new generation that wasn't there in a previous set, which was formerly more, cyanobacteria, types of bacteria that didn't have photosynthesis, that had to use more chemical energy from, things like they call them black smokers. Not a racist comment, that's just what they called the underground volcanoes, and that's why there was a lot of life typically organized around these mineral-rich, very hot environments in the deep ocean. There's a lot more bacterial and early life, because that was what drove the internal workings of the organism, until photosynthesis allowed for greater expansion and mobility of algae, of other things that could all of a sudden grow and evolve outside of the influence of these underground volcanoes. Team Smooth just said $4. Thank you very much for that very, very nice $4 tip. Appreciate that. So you see that there's a reciprocity, right? Over time, as calcium, it's there in nature, but it's not really being used outside of a very, very boring array of activities, until certain types of bones begin to form that cause the calcium flowing in nature to all of a sudden be incorporated into living organisms, giving them, again, greater mobility, greater capacity of action, as metabolism's metabolic power of transforming foods into usable energy allows for greater heat regulation of those organisms that can begin to go into colder areas, right, with an internal warming mechanism that increases as you go from lizard species that cannot move as much. They don't need as much food coming in, but they don't move as well as it gets colder. They have to stay very, very still. Whereas a mammalian species has to consume a hell of a lot, like 20 times more caloric intake than a reptile. However, that mammalian, newer so-called species, has a much greater field of mobility, a much higher power of metabolism, of transforming matter into energy to perform work. And thus with that comes greater regulatory power to go into colder environments, to have internal heating that lasts longer. So all of these are the sorts of things that I think biologists in a healthier age had appreciated a lot more than in our current age, where we've gotten stuck on this worshiping of the structures of Darwinian evolution. Lion of Britain says, yes, this is the crux of the matter. Random mutation absolutely meaningless, as to prove something is random, one has to prove it follows no pattern, which is impossible. So yes, it's all a total BS. Yes. I mean, it's cheap, right? You have to... The credulity that people have to hold on, that they have to internalize to keep this belief going, is quite astounding. And again, you have manifestations of this in the realm of physics, especially of the Niels Bohr quantum mechanics school of promoted by people like Wolfgang Pauli, of Max Heisenberg, other followers of Bohr, which all presume that we could take this randomness idea of Darwin and apply it now to matter itself, devoid of life. But that matter itself, what we see is of life that has, a beautiful rock or a crystal might appear to have certain symmetries, but that would be false. Certain mountains appear beautiful, right? Certain planets appear, the rings of Saturn and other things appear beautiful. Other solar systems, when you look through a telescope, might appear beautiful with their golden section spiral formations. But it's all an illusion, says Niels Bohr, and people who believe in the idea that God plays dice, that all of this is actually just pure randomness. It's emergent. They use words that they cooked up to just sound smart, but they're actually stupid. It's like this, that these apparent images of order, of quality, of beauty that our eyes can detect in nature, it's actually an illusion. These are just emergent aspects of randomness. That when you let randomness just be itself, it's called chaos theory. Big thing that was cooked up as patchwork in the 60s. They call it chaos theory because they say, okay, you let randomness just do its thing, and it will emerge into organized creative phenomenon. So don't think about it. It just is. Same thing for the free market. It's basically the free market gospel. Don't think about the future. Don't think about the past. Don't think about using mind and intention to govern the flow of your economic system. Just let it all be. Liberalism, right? It'll all just kind of organize itself with hidden, invisible hands, and it'll work out. Yet it never seems to. It seems like every time we do that, our nations get weaker, our deep states get stronger, the powers of evil increase in their influence. Every single time, the British Empire increases in its power and influence over the world as their victims get weaker and more subdued. Every time we do the thing, speculative insanity, bubbles take the place of where, what real investment banking used to do. All of a sudden, speculative bubbles take the place, and people's lives get worse, right? Slavery increases every bloody time we fall for it. So the other option is to have faith that maybe the Creator exists. The Creator is reasonable and good and created us as part of creation, which has influencing within creation as a whole, goodness and beauty and reason. And that if we choose to, with our will, freely bring about and grow that part of us, which is reasonable and true and good, we will ourselves live our lives more in harmony with that natural law. What a crazy thought. What a crazy thought. And life might not get easier for us if evil is something which has been permitted to grow in its influence, but we will be happier. We'll have greater access to our ability to be creative, to problem solve, to have insights that transcend merely computer logic or the sensual domain where, popular opinion, the mob might influence or override our decision-making powers if we are weaker minds without real knowledge. That's what kind of happens. So, these are just some little musings that I wanted to share. I hope people take the time to go and share the documentary. It's a short one. It's only 22 minutes long, but I think it's a useful little manifesto, and it's going to be available in the comment section as soon as this stream is over. I will pop it in the comment section, and people can go ahead and either rewatch it if you want, or just share it on social media with your loved ones, whomever, and get some traction. We're also raising funds, so we're doing a couple of other documentaries right now, which I'll just, I guess, announce. One of them that's underway right now is on, it's called the Black Sun Rising. That's something to keep on your radar. Esoteric Nazism, past and present, since there is a revival of a rehabilitation underway currently of Hitler and Nazism more generally. There's a consorted effort to rebrand Hitler as the hero of the story of World War II. fighting the evil, bad Jew bankers. Like it's a big thing. It's not just Nick Fuentes. It's not just Joe Rogan who's been playing AI translated speeches of Hitler and pointing out to his followers that Hitler doesn't seem to be such an irrational bad guy after all. Well, there's actually a much more broad intention behind all of this, which is moving us in a direction where we are expected, by and large, if we're conservatives, at least in mindset, our profiles have been targeted to nudge us. Don't think the nudging just applies to the left. It applies to the right too, but to nudge us towards increasing radicalization, tribalism, Templarism, Crusadism, and fascism, but of a different variety, a different flavor of it than what we've seen manifesting on the left side. The left has been brainwashed and nudged to have a crusade against global warming and against overpopulation. The right has been nudged to have a crusade, as Pete Hegseth has called for, the new American crusades against Chinese communism, against Islam, against the immigrants, against the brown people who are trying to steal our lives, our way of life, that we have to get ready to fight against, or else be suppressed and subdued by the new African or Chinese or Panamanian colonizers. The narratives are there. They're in play. They're in play for a reason, because it's part of a much broader operation that is supposed to create emotional thinking that brings us into a certain profile that will make us very predictable, according to social engineers who would like to game out and create a new civil war. And that is part of the design, to do what they failed to do in 1865, to do it again, but to do it within the context of a new rupture in the world system that will emerge out of a period of chaos, with something that looks maybe new in some ways, but is actually very ancient, and it was always a bad idea that we saw animating the worst of Babylon and the Babylonian Empire well over 3 millennia ago. So what's old is new, what's new is old in some ways there, but there are new ideas, there are necessary ideas that can break us out of this trajectory, and I do hope that everybody takes the time, like I said, to work on themselves, read some good literature, listen to some good speeches by people who had great ideas that were beautiful, true, and good, like John F. Kennedy, like Martin Luther King. Take an afternoon, take a week, and listen to as many of those speeches as you can, and see what incubates, what awakens in the heart and in the mind. And Ross Shark Lives correctly notes that Matt is saying, don't go off half-cocked. That is correct. That is correct. Exactly what I'm saying. So I guess without further ado, there is, I was not able to download the ad for GART coming up, but I hope people go check out GART. It is going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. A lot of speakers there. I won't be able to make it this time around, but it's going to be great. You can go to the Badlands website for all of that information on how to find it and get your tickets. And otherwise, this was a pleasure, and I hope that you all join me again next Sunday, where we'll watch a movie and talk about it. All right. Good night.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.